The Tale of Cabin 31. My name is Samuel Covington, and the following tale, I must tell you, comes from when I was in my 30th year. As incredible as this story may seem, my experience was as real as any, and yet I pray for it to fade like a dream from my mind. For there are dark things that swim in the depths of the mind, as there are dark things that lurk in the depths of the ocean. The ocean. Since men first put out to sea and into the unknown, there have been many tales of horrors rising from those fathoms below. Sailors, young and old, have claimed to see such things. And on the grand passenger vessel, the HMS Lady Germain, some claim to have seen such things in Cabin 31. The Lady Germain was a well-adorned and steadfast steamship. However, its guests had often complained of strange noises and displeasing smells emanating from that particular room, Cabin 31. Passengers would whisper amongst themselves that it was befouled by an unearthly presence. Some even told of an incident when a passenger went half mad after spending the voyage alone in that very room. When he finally disembarked, they said he was raving about shipwrecks and drownings and tormented spirits of the deep. It became a source of much whispering that the cabin was haunted. My name is Samuel Covington, and in the year of 1879, I boarded the Lady Germain on a 2-month pleasure cruise with a ticket reserved for Cabin 31. I knew full in advance of the room's reputation, but I took it to be nothing more than an old ghost story, so I staked my ticket and reputation on that particular residence to prove that I was brave and unafraid of such nonsense. And in the weeks ahead, I would learn to see just how brave I was indeed. Now, the voyage began pleasantly in June, and we departed from the Cape of Dare south to Gibraltar, and the seas were calm, the winds were mild, and the sun shined warm every morning at dawn. Everyone on board was in a cheerful mood, and the seamen and crew were friendly and accommodating. The ship's cabin boy was a stout lad of 15 years named Tom, and every afternoon Tom would bring me a steaming cup of hot tea to enjoy. It helped me mark the passing of time. Time which had seemed to be slowing while we crossed the vastness of the ocean. It was not until the second week of the voyage that I began to notice something amiss within my cabin. It began first at night as a faint yet inexorable smell. I couldn't tell what it was, until it made me recall my earlier voyages as a youth, and one particular night when my ship had encountered a decrepit old whaling vessel. Now that ship was little more than a blackened hulk, and we could smell it before we spotted it on the horizon. Smoke was rising as it went on boiling its latest catch, and even then, I had recognized that smell as nothing less than the stench of the dark ocean depths. And it was here, now, right within my cabin. And following the smell was this damp chill in the air, and I felt a growing sense that the walls of the cabin were becoming waterlogged with dank and salty foam of the sea. The first night I found the strange happenings to be just a minor discomfort. The second night, it became even more present, and I had a restless attempt at sleep, which left me tired and crotchety by the morning. I felt so out of sorts that I told the quartermaster of my deck of my troubled sleep and the odd atmosphere in the room. But when I mentioned that it was Cabin 31 in which I was staying, he immediately became silent and quickly absconded to separate duties elsewhere. That afternoon, I sipped my tea a bit more slowly after Tom brought it to me. Was I simply imagining this? Was it merely a dream, or perhaps just my mind playing tricks brought on by too many days at sea? And yet, I was an experienced seaman myself. I had never encountered such queer happenings. So as the sun began to set that following evening, I felt a growing sense of dread within the pit of my stomach, and I returned to my cabin as the dark set in. For several hours, nothing was wrong. I even found time to write in my journal by candlelight. but I couldn't shake my trepidations, and before laying down that evening, I made sure to say an extra prayer before slipping beneath the covers. And I tried to sleep, but once again, I now began to hear the sound of the ocean rising. It was louder this time, and definitely not coming from those rolling waves of the sea outside. This noise seemed to be emanating from right within my cabin. It was the sound of dark waves lapping upon my floorboards and the churning brine of the deep. And I noticed that same foul stench now returning to the cabin. It felt as if the walls were now watching me, and they pulsed with the breath of a living presence. The air tasted now of a salty dampness, and I began now to realize my folly in so easily dismissing the tales that I had heard of this room as nothing more than superstition. I could no longer deny the truth that there was indeed something dreadfully wrong now within the cabin. Something dreadfully wrong in the cabin. And it was coming for me. It was here in the room. I could feel it rising like a nightmarish tide up the back of my neck. I could take this no longer now, and I hurriedly stood up from my bed, but as I did, my feet were met with the icy splash of water running across the floor. What was happening? It was like the sea itself was now possessing the room, its darkest and most forsaken depths, bringing with it the ancient sounds of twisting masts, clanking chains of anchor, and now I began to also hear a low, shuddering moan, a lost voice, growing ever closer. Half paralyzed with fear, I turned my head, and there I saw it. Of all the twisted ghouls and monsters of the deep that I had ever faced in my worst nightmares, I never imagined anything as abominable as that which was now rising slowly from the darkness behind my bed and staring directly at me. Its skin had the color of seaweed. Its sunken eyes were two dull yellow globes embedded in a twisted mange of bulging green viscera, and it crawled towards me with its long, sinewy arms. Overcome with fear, my legs suddenly refused to move, as if they were clamped in irons. And then, without warning, the floor heaved beneath me as if the ship had been hit by a wave and was now listing to the side, and I lost my balance and fell backwards towards the bed. And the terrible visitor was now upon me, and it wrapped its hideous arms around my shoulders. I struggled to get away, but it had the strength of 5 men, and it began to pull, and I felt the full force of its decrepit stench washing over me, its dripping arms wrapping around me, choking me as I was pulled back down towards the darkness from which it had come. Whatever this horrifying thing was, it brought with it the sunken depths of the deadest of oceans, 1,000 years of shipwrecks of doomed men, the tortured wails of drowned souls long forgotten. They echoed through my bones as it grasped me, and it was pulling me down to join them in the darkest of watery graves. Though I was held in its vice-like grip, I summoned every last ounce of strength, and I broke free of its clutches, throwing myself towards the door of the cabin. I barely managed to grab a hold of the doorknob before the creature was quick to grasp my ankle, and again pulled me back towards it. And I tried to open the door, but it didn't budge, either locked or jammed or held shut by the evil phantoms that were now in command of the room. And I heard myself begin to scream for help as my grip began to lose its strength, and I prepared myself to never see another day. And then suddenly the door flew open, and someone was calling my name and reaching out a hand to me. It was Tom, the cabin boy who had heard my desperate calls and had come running. I grabbed his hand and I felt him pull, and as if by a miracle I also felt the cold grip on my ankle disappearing. And we both bolted out into the fresh air of the outside. And as fast as I could, I slammed shut the door to cabin 31. Our faces met as I breathed in the fresh air from the calm sea that now surrounded us. I must have looked like a solemn wretch, and Tom appeared to be pale and anxious. Had he seen the monstrosity that had been lurking in the cabin? I never was to know, for after he took me to the ship's infirmary and bid me farewell, I never managed to find him again. My ordeal had left me extremely weakened and dejected. I had broken my arm, and I was overcome with a fever for the remainder of the voyage, and I remained confined to my bed in the infirmary until we returned to the port. By the time we arrived, I had begun to regain my strength, and the memory of what I had experienced that night was slowly fading, as if it had all been just a terrible nightmare. I felt a deep sense of relief that morning when we docked and I was finally able to disembark the ship along with the other passengers. As I walked down the causeway of the ship with my bags in hand amongst the line of sailors, we happened to pass by my former lodging, cabin number 31. I took one final glance towards that accursed place. The doorway was now boarded up with wooden planks, securely hammered into the hull. Written across them in fresh red paint were the words, "Do not enter." The wooden planks were damp, and the scent of the ocean was rolling in from the waves beyond.